2. Hello, folks. I'm Jeffrey Daugherty, your friendly neighborhood Christian whistleblower, and I'm glad to have you here with us on a Friday night. And I'm very honored and happy tonight to be joined by a guy that I find very, very interesting and whose work I love. We're joined by Sam Miserendino, who is responsible for the Prince of Pieces comic that you all saw me go through a few weeks ago. Sam, welcome to the broadcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
It's a real pleasure to have you here. It really is. And you just told me before we came on something that shocked me, that you had never stepped foot in a comic book store before you started writing Prince of Pieces?
Right, absolutely. And I hadn't read a graphic novel before I started writing it.
So what made you decide, hey, now did you write it thinking it was going to be a comic or a graphic novel?
No, I wrote it thinking it was going to be a film. It started out as a film script, and we got fairly far along in the process. We had some really good people attached to it, and the financing fell through. So I still wanted to get the story out there, and the visual structure of a script is very similar to a graphic novel. So I decided, I was talking to our special effects artist, and he said, why don't you think about doing this as a graphic novel? And it was a very easy transition to make, because the way you structure a script is very similar to how you structure a graphic novel.
So had you written a screenplay or?
Yep, we had a screenplay, and we were, again, pretty far along. We had Jello Biafra was lined up to play the televangelist.
Oh, man.
Which was pretty awesome.
That is awesome. I wrote a screenplay once and got offered $500 for it, but they were going to take my name off of it, so I didn't go forward with it. But yeah, it's I know how a screenplay is structured. I didn't realize that was real close to the structure for like a graphic novel or a comic book.
Yeah, it definitely is.
Very, very interesting. So when you decided to make it a comic, how difficult was it to find the right illustrator for you?
It took a couple of tries, but I was really lucky because again, the special effects artist who was going to work on the film referred me to one artist in New York. He took a look at it and just didn't think he'd be able to do it, not because of the theme, but which, of course, you might imagine could scare a few people off.
Absolutely.
But just in terms of his style. So he referred us to Colin Blanton, and he and I hit it off incredibly. I mean, he just took what I had written, and his ability to capture it visually was amazing.
It's definitely a home run. I thought it was really brilliant, and I'm not just saying that. I thought it was fantastic. Now, a story like that is, and let me just ask this before I get too far down the road. You're not in comics very much, but it seems to me that, is there some type of a rivalry or something between the writers and the illustrators? Who's really responsible for the best part of the work? Is it a head-knocking thing, or is it mostly cooperative?
Yeah, it was actually entirely cooperative. We just had a really seamless, creative relationship, and it worked out beautifully. There was I made it very collaborative. Like, we had everybody involved in kicking ideas around. So the idea wasn't, I never took the approach of, this is my idea and it's my way or no way.
Gotcha.
I really valued the input, not just from Colin Blanton, the artist, but also Matthew Mason, the letterer, was in when we'd have these like creative roundtables over the phone.
So is the letterer the guy that draws the letters in, the text in?
Right.
Okay.
And he's a very talented artist in his own right. He actually did the cover.
That is really art. Let me just show people what we're talking about. See if I can pull this up, because I've got mine. I bought it. So there's the Prince of Pieces cover. And so the fellow that did the letters actually did the cover?
Right.
Excellent. And I thought this was just brilliant. Just the subtleties in here, based on the best-selling book of all time.
Right.
Was that you that came up with that?
Yeah, it was.
That's just fantastic. And then this is so classic. For 2,000 years, you've been eating his flesh and blood. Now it's his turn.
Yeah.
And there it is, the Prince of Pieces, Zombie Jesus. Sam, I have to ask you, how did this idea come into your mind?
Well, it came up Primarily, I've always been fascinated by televangelists, sort of in an attraction repulsion kind of way. So I've watched them a lot, and I've always been pretty outraged by how they use religion to exploit people, and especially how they exploit very vulnerable people. So I thought, wouldn't it really be incredible if this Jesus, who was a manifestation of all that greed and hypocrisy that these people put into the symbol, came back as this sort of ultimate blowback. So that was really the germ of the idea.
What a great idea. And I've had some background with Jimmy Swaggart. Did you study him at all?
Oh, sure. He was one of the inspirations. Jimmy Swaggart, Oral Roberts, Pat Robertson. As you'll note, the reverend of this is named Robert Patterson. So it's kind of a play off of.
It's a nice culmination of Robert Schuller and Pat Robertson and all of it. It's a nice melding of it. Can I ask what your religious background is? You don't have to answer.
Oh, sure. No, not at all. I don't mind at all. I grew up Catholic, and I grew up very Catholic. I was a lector at church and, the whole 9 yards. And then just gradually with time, it was interesting because I thought I'm very involved in religion, but I've never read the Bible. And so one day I thought, I'm going to read it. I sat down and read it and thought, this just doesn't make sense to me. So from there, I sort of drifted and I became an agnostic, and then basically acknowledged that I was only saying I was an agnostic because I was being cowardly. So I then embraced atheism, which is how I actually felt.
Makes sense. I can understand the progression. Now, is there anything in this cover that's more subtle that we're missing that you'd like to point out to us?
No, the cover itself is pretty straightforward. We did put a lot of Easter eggs in the book, both in the text and in the artwork. So,
excellent. Now, do you have any particular ones in mind, or do you want me to just kind of page through? And I love this. God is a comedian whose audience is too afraid to laugh. And how true that is.
Yeah.
Because I think, Sam, there's many people just like you, and I was one of them. I was 20 years a Pentecostal minister, believe it or not. And you read like you did the Bible, and you see some of these things that are so absurd, they border on being laughable. But you're afraid to laugh. You're afraid to question. And if you ever do question, of course, it's attributed to your lack of faith, or you're not trusting in God. So it really is a check your brain at the door. And we really are too afraid to laugh. And I think afraid's a key word, because it is all based, a lot of it at least, on guilt and fear. And I understand in the Catholic realms the guilt is pretty high.
Oh, sure, very much. I mean, you're just so filled with guilt and fear on in so many regards growing up Catholic. So,
and it's not that much difference even between a Catholic and Protestant. I don't think ever been to a Catholic service, but of course did a whole lot of Protestant services. And I think basically, Sam, Protestants are just Catholics that aren't afraid of holy water.
Right.
And not as many of our ministers wore dresses. Some of them did, but not as many. Now, this really hit me from the beginning because, they're doing a communion here, or a Eucharist, or a Mass, I guess, as the Catholics call it. And I thought it was very, very deep of you, because not many people catch this. You really are touching from the very beginning on the cannibalistic human sacrifice imagery that's really at the core of the Eucharist and the communion.
Right. Yeah, it certainly is. When you think about it logically, you think of, when it's sort of wrapped in the, sort of in something that we just are so familiar with, there's a normalcy to it. But when you step back, it's kind of shocking, actually. If you came upon some remote group doing this, you'd think, wow, this is kind of unique.
It would have. I mean, I have a associate's degree in anthropology, and if you were able to take the objective view of an anthropologist and say, what are these people doing? This is crazy. But it's so hard for people to get to that place of objectivity when we've been, ever since, if you're Catholics, ever since you were an infant, you were sprinkled, and it's just becomes, even though it's bizarre, it really does become normal in our minds. And it takes almost excuse the term, and almost a divine revelation for you to get any objectivity.
Right.
Craziness. And of course, if you tell us before we get any further, because I know people are going to want to get a hold of this, how can they get a hold of this book and find out more about your work, Sam?
Well, it's the book is, I've got a Facebook page for it, which you just go to Prince of Pieces on Facebook. It's available on Amazon, and it's also available through Alternative Tentacles, which is Jello Biafra's record company.
Excellent. Now, is there a print version? I keep getting asked.
Yes, there is. And that's what you can get through either Alternative Tentacles or Amazon.
Oh, okay. Excellent. Excellent. I looked for the print version, but all I found was this electronic one through Comixology, I believe.
Right.
Excellent. So, and then of course, in the background here, you find out that this priest is actually abusing this kid, right?
Right.
And you don't have to be a Catholic to be sickened by that. And it's just so sad and so tragic when you think about what's going on. And Sam, there's a billion Catholics out there, and I'm pretty convinced that there's not all billion of them aren't dirty, rotten, scandalous, scoundrel people. Why do you think so many people that are good people that still remain in the Catholic Church, in spite of the full knowledge that even to the church's admission, up to 5% of their priests are pedophiles? Why do they stay?
Well, I think why they stay is because of what it offers them in other aspects. I mean, because there are such a broad range of Catholic churches. There are the very strict dogmatic ones. There are the ones that I think tend to be a little more flexible and liberal. So, I think you have the broad percentage of people who are Catholics or any religion who are, good people who are just seeking answers. And this is where they found an answer that seems to fit.
So you just get to the place where, like I did for at least 10 or 12 years, you just look past the obvious. We as Protestants, we called it put it on the shelf. If there's something you see that you can't understand or wrap your head around, you just put it on the shelf and move on. So you really do have to put your blinders on, keep your head down, and just keep going, even in the midst of so much horrific stuff. And it's certainly not limited to the Catholics. But my hope is that someday people will begin to see, and I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility, Sam, that people looking at the Prince of Pieces and seeing it presented to them in a graphic form, a form that is more understandable and outside of the religious context, that it might cause some of these lights to go on and say, man, what am I doing?
Right.
Have you had anybody say anything like that to you after reading the comic?
No, the thing I've found most interesting about the book is that it seems to have bridged this sort of impossible gap. Like, people who are atheists and sort of, very skeptical about religion really like it. And then I've had people who at conventions who identify themselves as fundamentalist Christians, and they really like it because they kind of like, they don't like the hypocrisy that they see either. So they kind of like the idea of this sort of kick-ass Jesus coming back and taking out the people who are exploiting the religion that they embrace.
Kicking ass and taking names, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I consider myself a follower of the Christ, not a follower of Christianity anymore. And it certainly speaks to me. And I have a very good friend who's an indigenous shaman, and he said a profound thing to me, that many times people that have been indoctrinated in religion, whether it be Catholic or whether it be Protestant religion or some other religion, many times we're so indoctrinated that it almost takes a time in atheism for someone, a requisite stopover in atheism, to get from hyper indoctrination into any true spirituality. So you may be at your final spot and maybe not, Sam, but I think we're all trying to do all we can do. And it certainly sounds like you're making progress as an individual.
Oh, thanks.
And I love this imagery. I mean, this is, it's subtle, but yet it gets the point across. And it really captures the nefarious, dark nature of what's going on. And as a writer, I've never seen, my work come to life like this. How does it feel as a writer to see something you wrote come to life so graphically and so poignantly?
Oh, it's an amazing experience. It really is. That first moment when you see, your words represented through images is just fantastic. And
this is the first time we see the Prince of Pieces arise. Obviously, the priest is abusing this young boy. And I think this is the priest that says, don't be afraid. There's nothing to be afraid of.
Right.
And, the irony is right there in the juxtaposition. The priest is saying, don't be afraid. And does the boy see the Prince of Pieces at this point, Sam?
At that point, he doesn't, because at that point, what's happening is, the Jesus on the cross is slowly coming to life.
Oh, that's right. So he's still on the cross here. Okay.
So as the outrages grow, he becomes sort of manifest.
I see. So this outrage is being perpetrated in his vicinity. So he's still up here, lifeless. And then as this whole thing begins to unfold, you can see the points of light. He begins to become conscious, and down off of the cross he comes. Sam, is he alive? Is he a zombie? What is he?
No, he's alive. And the interesting thing with it is, when I wrote it, I mean, the zombie thing was sort of incidental in my mind, because to me, what was far more important was the idea of him coming back as this manifestation of all the greed and violence. So, this sort of demented, almost a creation of, he is a creation of mankind. So, the zombie thing was kind of incidental, but of course what happened is, when the book came out, no pun intended, that idea kind of took on a life of its own, and it became a kind of convenient shorthand.
Gotcha.
Jesus. But, obviously I like to think the book's much more layered and textured than just, a zombie Jesus riff.
Absolutely. And you're responsible for all of this text. You wrote it, right? You didn't illustrate it, but you wrote it.
Right.
And this is just brilliant. I mean, think of the irony of this. Here's a priest that's still hiking up his pants from abusing a kid. And he's asking, is this some kind of sick joke? It hits you. I mean, you did such a tremendous job with this. And I love the words that you put in the mouth of Jesus. How is it, Father, that you can swallow camels but strain out at gnats? And then he goes and begins to choke him. And I love this. I mean, it almost looks here like your imagery is that the Prince of Pieces is made up of flies.
Right.
So he's really become death and a destroyer of worlds, hasn't he?
Right. Yeah, he has.
Amazing stuff. And then, of course, he takes care of business here with the priest. And I thought this was brilliant, too. It's another allusion back to the whole idea of drinking blood, because if you're a new listener, people don't understand that the Catholic Church teaches the doctrine of transubstantiation, which means that the wine, the cup, literally becomes the body or the blood of Jesus. Is that accurate, Sam, or is that just Protestant?
No, that's accurate. That the belief is that through the ritual at the communion, that the wine actually becomes blood.
So do people ever in the Catholic Church sit there and say, why are we partaking in a cannibalistic human sacrifice ritual?
No, I don't think so. Because I think they see it more as a symbol of the sacrifice, and they look at it that way. I mean, at the time I got sort of out of Catholicism as such, I never gone into it too deeply, and at the point where I started looking into the religion more deeply, that's where I thought, this doesn't make sense to me.
Gotcha. Now, is this RIP here? Is that just RIP, or is that an allusion to rest in peace as well?
No, it's just RIP.
Oh, okay. I'm looking too deeply into it.
I should take credit for all these great ideas you have. I'll start doing that.
It's just amazing, though. And I like how it would be so easy for you as a former Catholic to just stay right with the Catholics. And let's face it, it's pretty easy right now to bash the Catholic Church. And people may not believe me, but I try to stay away from that, because you don't want to just make the Catholics the boogeyman, so to speak, because it's not just a Catholic problem. It's a problem throughout all of the branches of Christianity, in my opinion, and perhaps even all of Abrahamic religion, including Judaism and Islam, a control matrix of trying to keep people under control. So you can't think of the right word right now, but you go from Catholicism, and we go now into the classic Jimmy Swaggart, whoever, look at the guy on the wall type of scenario, where here's this poor old lady. I guess it's this fellow's grandma, or his mother. Which one? It's a mom?
His mother, yeah.
Yeah, it's mom. And here's his mom. She's living in humble circumstances. You know, she's not a pauper by any means, but she doesn't have hardly any money, you know, to feed herself. And here she is given $200 to this TV charlatan for tears that Christ actually cried on the cross.
Right.
and Sam, I know you've probably seen this. I've seen enough shreds of the original cross sold to, you know, build a battleship out of wood. Right. And I've seen, you know, holy prayer hankies. I've seen sand from the Holy Land. I've seen water from the Jordan River, and people giving hundreds of dollars for this to like Reverend Robert Patterson's Love and Power Hour.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And that, you know, that's just obviously inspired by just that absurdity that they just, and that horrible exploitation.
And that's exactly what it is. It's one thing for people that have money, that have disposable income, to support that. And if that's what people want to do, I mean, that's their choice. But when it becomes predatorial, and there's, you know, this lady is emblematic of probably millions of people that, I mean, actually go without food, Sam, I believe in many occasions, or eat, you know, a very unhealthy food to send money to a guy that's flying in a Gulfstream jet and, you know, driving a Ferrari.
Right. Exactly.
What I hope, and I really think that this is going to be your work will help some people realize that. And that's probably the biggest thing that frustrates me, is that people can't see it, won't see it. And when people try to even awaken them to it or show them what's going on, they fight against it. They'll fight for the people that are taking advantage of them.
Right. Yeah, they'll defend them. It's remarkable.
And that's kind of what this lady does. You know, her son, not so subtly, is trying to, you know, talk some sense into her. And, you know, she begins to defend her favorite preacher. And it's just, it really is tragic. And I like this too. I mean, here's the guy. I don't know if this guy if you were saying that, I know the other guy that's watching the girls walk across the street had just come from church, right?
Right.
Now, did this guy just come from church?
No.
Okay. But so what is he kind of emblematic to you? What was he representing?
You know, for me, he was just symbolic of someone who, again, takes advantage of other people, you know, in the most horrible sort of ways. And I guess, you know, these days, this may be particularly timely.
You're right.
So
it's even more broad than I saw. You're talking about religious people taking advantage of people on both the Catholic and the Protestant realms, but you're also talking about just plain old scumbags taking advantage of people as well.
Right.
Wow, very interesting. Very, very broadly based. And I would have loved to seen this become a film. Is there any possibility that it still may go that direction?
There is. I've had some people reach out to me. It hasn't really gotten a lot of traction yet, but you know, I've had some people tentatively reach out to me, so it's still a hope I have that'll happen.
Well, that's awesome. I mean, you would think with all of the, you know, the various outlets today with, you know, Netflix and Amazon and all that, you know, quality, you know, programming like this could find a place. Because I have to admit, I have a weakness for, you know, these kind of things like American Gods and Hannibal and this type of a genre. And I got to tell you, Sam, this I think is right up there with those. This could be, I mean, if Brian Fuller could get a hold of this and run with it, he could do something really remarkable with it, I think.
Thanks. Well, I hope so if he's watching.
Absolutely. If Brian Fuller is watching. Now, what were you trying to communicate with these girls, Sam?
Well, to me, this was important because you have the people who present this era. Like, I was very, very intrigued. And actually, this was something that Jello Biafra sort of keyed me onto, because we talked a lot about this idea, because he's very interested in this whole, you know, use of religion to exploit people, and, you know, very obviously finds it very disturbing too. And he sort of directed me to this whole culture of like these promise rings and these people who, you know, utilize this kind of, in this, I forget what it's called now, but where they can be like secondary virgins if they find Jesus. And, you know, again, that whole sort of contorting logic.
And then you get the promise keeper type thing for the men.
Right.
And that's what she's doing, folks. She's not slipping off a wedding ring. She's slipping off her little "I promise to be a virgin" ring, right?
Yeah.
that was given to her by her daddy. So there she goes and slips that off. So, I mean, what is this is this what that whole scene is conveying that you're talking about here?
It's that, and it's also, I got to tell you, I just love, like, I love horror, and I love horror movies.
Mm-hmm.
But part of it is a little nod to that convention of, teen sex equals, death in a horror movie.
Right. So it's not necessarily in any way you're pontificating that teens shouldn't have sex.
No, not at all.
Gotcha. So this Jesus being mad at this is just kind of a nod to the genre.
Well, it's a nod to the genre, but also, though, what's important is if you look at each of these individuals, they're it's not just that they're having sex; it's that they're also very terrible people. Like, you'll see the guy earlier is bragging about punching a developmentally disabled guy who was getting on his nerves. The woman dumped her coke on a homeless guy who asked for money. So then, of course, following, tying that into why Jesus is doing what he's doing. It's not about the sex. It's about what kind of people they are.
Gotcha. So it's not only the Catholics that are exploiting and the Protestants that are exploiting and the despicable people that we look at and can look down our nose at and say, oh, this is a bad person. It's the debutantes and the jocks that still think they're better than other people, that, it's almost like segments of society, no matter who we are, tend to look down on other segments of society. And it's kind of a look in the mirror of like, wow, sometimes we're the problem.
Right.
And I love, now, is she in a crucifixion pose there? Is that,
and that's something the artist did. He threw these things in there. And to be honest, there are times I still discover things he threw in.
Yeah.
These little Easter eggs that are just amazing.
And you got to love the fact that Jesus is walking on water here.
Right. Yeah.
So he's walking on water for the douchebag jock and the bitchy debutante, so to speak, that are looking down their nose at, beating up developmentally disabled people and being horrible to homeless people. So it really does. And in a weird way, it shows kind of the overall nature of Jesus wanting to help out all the downtrodden.
Right. Like, again, this Jesus comes back just in rage that people have just so neglected his precepts.
Right. And he throws them off the raft, and it's just the imagery in this is just amazing. It really is powerful. And you can see, the rivers of blood, and there he goes walking off again across the water. And if you look on one of the previous pages, he says to her,
whatsoever you have done to the least of my brothers, you have done to me. At the bottom panel.
Right here, yeah. So when she poured that Coke on the homeless man.
Right.
And there's that heart showing up again that was showing up at the headlights and stuff.
Yeah, that was a theme that the artist wanted to put in there, because he had been very, as he explained it to me, he said his sister had a painting that was called The Heart of Jesus, and
gotcha.
Incorporate that into the story.
Very, very interesting. And then this is interesting, and it's a headline in a comic book, but to me, it's real. Uh-huh. It's really, truly what is going on. And now we're back into the whole evangelist genre, right?
Right.
And it's just, to me, it's an incredible work. It's a powerful work. And I mean, the thought that went into this, and the fact that you weren't into comic books, and you obviously did a lot of study on evangelical type of Protestant religion.
Right. Oh, sure.
And how did you do that?
Really just a lot of it was through watching the televangelists, and then digging deeper, watching videos that exposed how they exploited people. There's obviously some very good videos out there where people have exposed them. I think there's one where James Randi intercepted. I don't know if you've seen this. I think it was Peter Poppet. James Randi intercepted radio transmission.
Yeah, Peter Popoff is his name.
Popoff, that's it. Yeah, and Randi intercepted transmissions between he and his wife, where she was telling them who the person was in the front row, and then he would say, he would know all this about them, and they think it was divinely inspired knowledge.
Exactly. Yep, I'm very familiar with that. I actually worked with Peter Popoff one time, not worked with him, but was on the same program. And this is interesting too, kind of a nod to the whole scouting thing where some nefarious,
Right.
activities also take place as well. And so I think it's brilliant how you show us that it's not just one segment of society that we can point fingers at. It's really prevalent throughout all society and even us.
Right.
And I like how you get into this too with the hate for other people that aren't like you. This guy's railing against homosexuals. And, it always seems like the people that are propagators of hate always need to have a scapegoat, don't they, Sam?
Right. Yeah, they do.
And it's so sad that, the reason they do it is because it works. And it only works because we allow it to work. And you would hope that as humans, we would rise above this divide and conquer and this scapegoat mentality.
Right. And again, you'd especially, again, the hypocrisy. I mean, to be, embracing a religion that's theoretically based in this, theme of love your brother and so forth. And yet, any opportunity and on many fronts to attack gays is, it's just meat for the crowd.
Oh, and it's so silly. It doesn't make any sense. Have you ever had any feedback from any of the evangelicals that like it, that are a little bit upset that Jesus would be defending homosexuals?
No, I haven't.
Because a lot of them, seemingly the ones I know would have trouble with that because they think that homosexuals deserve what they're getting. But I love the way you showed that the guy that's defending the downtrodden is defending all the downtrodden, and we don't pick and choose. I've often liked to say that there's no them, only us, and really nobody's free till we're all free.
Right. I agree. Yeah.
And that includes, gays and people that may not choose to do things the way you choose to do them. And do we really think that the God of the universe is all that interested in what people do with their genitals?
Right. You'd hope not.
You would think there might be
right.
a couple things of more importance on his mind.
I hope so.
I really do. And, I personally, I'm not gay. I'm not, LGBTQ or any of that. But, I used to be, I'm not LBGTQ and don't hang out with any that do. But I began to realize that whether you are an L, a G, a B, a G, a T, a Q, or a straight, you're still, an MAN or a WMAN. We're all humans.
Right.
And there's so much more that binds us together than separates us. And we're not saying that you have to embrace a lifestyle that you're not comfortable with, but for heaven's sake, why would you not want to make a cake for somebody that has a different attraction than you do as far as affection and sexuality? Make the damn cake and go on.
Right. And it's horrible to use religion as a basis for causing harm and pain to other people. It's just outrageous.
It is outrageous, and that's the only thing that you can say about it. As I flip through these pages, if you know it's something that you want to point out, please do so. Because I could spend hours with it. Every one of these pages is brilliant.
Well, thank you. Yeah, this is one, like this little sequence on the talk show is probably the one where I gave the clearest expression of my voice in terms of the story.
Take us through this scene, if you will.
Yeah, well, this is where I wanted to just use an opportunity for one thing to, use one of these characters as a vehicle to just state my view on the whole, to sort of summarize my take on it.
Excellent.
And that's the doctor or the professor, Carlisle. And that's another little Easter egg we put in there because Carlisle was a famous, he was a pamphleteer in England, and he was arrested several times for blasphemy.
I didn't know that, Sam. That's brilliant. This is Carlisle, right?
Right.
Okay.
So I wanted to give this character his name because even once he was jailed, his wife continued issuing the pamphlets.
What were they about, Carlisle's original pamphlets?
Well, they were initially just about, challenging the religious order. They were at the time, at the time, what was blasphemy was a lot, now would not, Unitarians used to be considered unacceptably blasphemous back then. So, now it wouldn't be considered so radical, but it was just challenging the conventional wisdom and the place of religion, in everyday life.
Absolutely.
But
And what is this character in the comic taking us through?
Well, he's taking us through basically summarizing really the idea behind the story, that this Jesus has come back as a manifestation of all the negative energy that's been put into the symbol for the last 2,000 years, being used as a justification for racism, sexism, homophobia, wars, and saying that why are we surprised that this is how he's come back? This is what we've created.
And that's absolutely true. Sam, are you familiar at all with the concept of a tulpa?
Only from watching your show the other day when you talked about Prince of Pieces.
I mean, I know it seems kind of woo-woo and it seems kind of out there, but the first lady to do it was a lady over in Tibet, and she actually created, through the focused manifestation of her thoughts, a being that was able to be seen by other people. And a guy that started out like a jolly Friar Tuck kind of monk and who became a little bit hard to control. And she said it took her about 6 months to actually dematerialize him. But Sam, I think I've done shows on this, and I've actually thought about it a lot before I ever saw your comic. Maybe that's why your books, why it so resonated with me, is I think that, I don't think that Jesus is a historical fact. I don't think you can find any proof for his life, proof for his death. People writing about the history of that era didn't mention this tremendous show trial. I'm getting a little feedback. Did you? Is that on your end or my end?
I don't know. I'm losing something here.
Okay.
I don't know if you lost me.
Do you have your sound on your computer?
I do. I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you now. Whatever our problem was went away.
Okay.
So let me get back over here to this. But it's my belief that what you're describing here has actually happened. There is this Jesus tulpa out there that has been created by all of the manifested thoughts of Christianity. And there's probably even a devil that's been manifested out there by all the thoughts of Christianity. Not that they're real people, but they're real corporeal beings that do have some sentience and some ability to move and move among people, or at least among people that believe them. So I really think that in some ways, at least on the spiritual realm, Sam, what you're talking about here has actually manifested itself in our world today. I know that sounds crazy to you.
Well, it's, I don't know if you can guess from the word, but I tend to be somewhat of a skeptic. So
yes,
if that comes through or not, but, certainly I think if that did happen, this might be the Jesus that came back, and would be an interesting take on it.
Absolutely. And I think it's interesting that, I think creative people sometimes tune into the ether, so to speak, and, pull out ideas that are floating around there. So who knows, maybe we both kind of tuned into the same ether in some ways and pulled down our different personal interpretations of it.
Right. Yeah.
But it's definitely a powerful, powerful work. I think it really makes us sit back and take notice. And tell us about this scene right here.
This scene was a little, certainly was a nod to Frankenstein, because I love that scene where the little girl is picking the daisies. And then I also wanted to use it to show the gentle side of this Jesus, to show that he's not just this mindless killer, that he's got this kind, loving side still, but that, that he's just so enraged by what he's seen generally. But I wanted this to be sort of a little pause in the action and to show him in a slightly broader, his character in a slightly broader way.
And it's even significant that he calls her a little lamb, because he really, he is trying to be the good shepherd, right. Even though he really is kind of, if Christianity was real, and if the God of Christianity really was justice and love, he would have to have been something like this guy, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, you would think so.
You'd think so. But I mean, it's an excellent juxtaposition, but I think that rationally and even theologically, it's very hard to to actually believe that that could happen. But still, very, very interesting, a very, very powerful work. Now, you go to a lot of conventions, you said, right? A lot of horror conventions.
Right, a lot of horror and a few just pure comic conventions.
Tell us about the reactions that you get.
For the most part, the reaction tends to be positive. Like, as I said, and it surprised me initially that, you know, people who, again, obviously you can imagine having this book at a convention. I get into very interesting conversations with people.
I'll bet.
But the people who then, when we start talking, identify themselves as being more conservative and more Christian, that they'll buy it and really like it, you know, because they'll come back the next day or they'll contact me and let me know. You know, I have had a few people who are just, they see like the banner or they see the book and, you know, you can tell they'll either say, you know, that's not my God, or, you know, but that happens infrequently.
Has anyone ever gotten in your face, Sam?
No, nobody has.
Well, you look like a guy that can take care of himself, so I would think they'd be a little bit hesitant to jump you, but you've never had I rebuke you, you're a blasphemer, you're an antichrist type of thing?
No, you know, the only thing I've had along those lines is, you know, when I was working on the book and it was in development, it got some pre-release press. And what I'm assuming is a very conservative Catholic blogger picked up on it and incorporated it into an article she wrote about works that criticize Christianity.
Gotcha.
And then, you know, so she got that out there. But, you know, again, it's somebody who never read the book. And,
yep.
And again, I don't view the book as an attack on Christianity. It's an attack on people who use religion to exploit people.
Absolutely. And I thought this was interesting how it's a view through Jesus' eyes. I mean, he sees these guys and you know, sees it back to the old Roman soldiers that, you know, killed him. So it's very powerful imagery. It really is. And I don't want to go through the whole book because I want to keep people still wondering and wanting to purchase the book. And Sam, if they want to purchase the book, where can they go to again?
Again, they can go to Amazon, and then they can go to Alternative Tentacles.
Amazon or Alternative Tentacles.
Right.
Excellent.
And just going back a moment, you're asking about the reactions I've gotten. And one of the most interesting ones I've ever gotten was at my last convention in Georgia, where one person actually took my hand and prayed for me while holding my hand. And then two women wept for my imperiled soul.
Well, it's nice that they took that attitude. I mean, it could be worse.
Yeah, they were well intended. It was very kind and compassionate, but it was certainly, I have to say, those were the most unique reactions I've gotten.
And I think it speaks something about you that you're willing to let them take your hand and pray for you.
Oh, sure.
I mean, it can't hurt, right?
Oh, right, exactly. And, you know, you appreciate where it's coming from.
Exactly. It sounded like they were, you know, at least somewhat sincere. And I'm sure you felt that from them.
Oh, absolutely.
Do you mind if I look through the chat room here and see if there's any questions that people have for you?
No, not at all.
Perfect. Let's see what we've got here. Several people saying it's a great work. I really want to get a hold of it. Thanks for telling us where we can get it. A lot of people agreeing with you that, you know, as soon as they started and sat down and read the Bible, that it really, they started saying, oh, I can't believe this. You know, I can't, it doesn't resonate with me anymore. Carmen says, thank you, Sam, for doing Prince of Pieces.
Well, thank you, Carmen.
And it says, this is a great story. I'm giggling, but only because it's awesome. She almost feels guilty for giggling. So it means you've done a great job.
Oh, that's nice. That's nice to hear. I appreciate that.
Because, I mean, you really are taking, I mean, it's horrific imagery, but I think people that are smart and people that see where you're going with it, they see the story behind it, and it almost does kind of make you giggle like, wow, that's really good. That's really powerful.
Yeah, well, very much. I mean, I want it to be funny. I mean, that's a goal, you know, just I want it to make people think, and I want it to be, you know, the humor is pretty important to me.
How long did it take you to write this, Sam?
It took, from the time that I wrote it and the time the artist started working on it, that was about a 4-year process.
Wow.
So it was quite an extended period.
Somebody mentions that one of your characters looks like the kingpin drug dealer in Training Day.
Well, that may be the artist, so
That may be the artist, yeah. And Deanne says there's many good people in the Catholic Church. The institution is corrupt, but not everyone in it. How would you respond to that?
Well, I'd absolutely agree with him. And I think I said that earlier when I said that I think, most Catholics, just like most religious people, are very earnest people looking for answers.
Absolutely. And Sophie points out that it's not just within the Catholic Church, that she has, I don't know if it says her brothers, it kind of looks like she might have put it out through voice and how spell check goes, but she knew boys that were abused by Protestant pastors, people talking about abuse within Mormonism. So there's certainly no one group that we can point the finger at. And that old adage, when you point your finger at somebody, there's at least 3 other fingers pointing back at you. And the thing that, as I read through this, maybe it's because of my background, Sam, but I really was struck by the fact that you got to look at yourself and examine yourself. Am I doing any of these acts that are placing myself above other people, putting people below me? Am I doing anything that the Prince of Pieces might come after me for?
Right.
Is there going to be a sequel to the Prince of Pieces?
I'm debating. I'm certainly, I have ideas for it, and ideas that I didn't get into this book. So I'm considering it. Part of it is I'm very happy with how this book came out. So I don't want to dilute the idea by trying to stretch it. So if I do it, I want to make sure I can do it right.
Sam, I got to tell you, as a writer and as a person that was 20 years within the church, I think it's a home run. I think it's almost perfect. It really is.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
And here's a person I think is a little bit of still within the Christian realms. And they say that, yes, he's back and he's angry, and he's even more angry than in this comic version. He's truly angry. And no matter how you view these last days vision of spirit and truth, the real Jesus is at least as angry as this Jesus.
Oh.
And that's almost a victory if you can get people within that genre to start seeing the wrongs, and maybe that's a step towards saying, well, maybe I need to think a little bit more deeply about this and not just go along with what I've always been taught.
Right.
And a person says, I feel bad for people that are still in the church. That was me a year ago. And this is a question for you, Sam. Do you believe in holy water?
No, I don't.
Okay. Absolutely. I don't agree with holy water either. Are you still, you're not still currently a church member, right? You've pretty much embraced atheism?
Right.
Okay.
I have set foot in various churches. My wife is very spiritual, so I have no objection to it. I enjoy going when I go, and just hope I don't burst into flame when I walk through the door.
I don't think you will. Sam, what is the difference in your opinion between being agnostic and being atheist?
Well, I think by being no offense to agnostics, having been one, but the group I'm most worried about offending is, I think it's kind of a fence-sitting place to be. It's sort of like, I suppose you can be agnostic from a genuine philosophical point of view, where you can just say, there's not enough information for me to make a decision. But when I claimed I was agnostic, it was more fence sitting, like sort of being afraid to take that step.
Gotcha.
And it was my wife who kind of gave me the push. She said, why do you say you're agnostic? You don't really believe. Why don't you just kind of come out of the closet on that and admit you're an atheist? And I thought, she's right. So I did.
And even though your wife is quite spiritual, she doesn't have any problem being married to an atheist like you.
No, not at all.
Excellent. Now, did she help at all in the writing of the book?
No.
Okay.
So.
She would read some pages though, right?
Oh, sure. She'd take a look at it and, let me know if she thought something was working or if it wasn't.
I used to do a lot of stand-up comedy, and I only bombed one time. And it was a little club, and there was about 40 people in there, and 30 of them were in the same birthday party. And I had this joke that I used to do that slayed everywhere else, Sam, but I talked about why did what was it? It's about Jesus walking on water. Why did Jesus walk on water? And the punchline was, well, how could he swim with those holes in his hands and feet? But this lady hated it, and somebody here in the chat room talks about how did he walk on the water with the holes in his feet? Well, it just runs off, right? It just runs off his feet.
Like hydroplaning.
It's like hydroplaning. It doesn't wear him down. And Trisha G from the UK says, "Job well done."
Oh, thank you.
And somebody's talking about a crush they had on a young priest when they were 12. They liked going to church then. Oh my! Now, do you have a schedule somewhere where people can tell what conventions you're going to be at?
If they go to the Facebook page, I'll post on there when I'm scheduled for an upcoming convention. Right now, the next one I have scheduled is Chicago. I'm not sure if it's April or May. It's the Walker Stalker convention there.
Oh, very nice. Very nice. Somebody says, be careful or Jeff might start selling holy water. I don't think so. No, I've never been a holy water guy. So no. And, somebody asked you, as an agnostic, is there any way that you could see that there could be a tulpa Jesus, or does agnosticism preclude any type of spiritual belief in those type of beings or entities?
Well,
I'm sorry, atheism. They said agnosticism, but I know you're atheist.
Right. I think that, I can't speak for all atheists, but for me it would, only because, I think the same logic that I apply to the existence or non-existence of a God, or the same skepticism that I apply to that, I would apply to those claims as well. I'd view them as extraordinary claims. It would require extraordinary proof. So from my perspective, it would. Gotcha.
Now, someone who's not a Catholic asked the question with the confessional and everything, is it accurate to say that there's people within the Catholic Church that say we can go out and do whatever we do on the weekend as long as we go to confession on Monday? Or again, is that Protestant picking on people?
I don't think people go out with that intention. You know what I mean? I don't think they think, okay, well, I can do whatever I want. I've never known anyone who's taken that approach.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. Now, here's an interesting question, Sam. Being an atheist, I think this will be very interesting for you. And it's interesting even for me where I come from. You have a lot of these people that get in terrible situations and they say they call on the name of Jesus and they get rescued or delivered. What do you think's going on in those scenarios?
Well, I guess
as an atheist.
Right. Well, I think that for one thing, I think it's very selective. I think if you look at the number of people who are crying out to Jesus and are not getting rescued, it probably far outnumbers the people who claim who feel it has happened. I also think it's remarkable when, a tornado will rip through a community, kill 20 people, and one guy's house is standing and he'll say, God saved me. Well, what about the other 20 people?
Exactly. Or the church survives and 20,000 houses are wiped out, but praise God, he saved the church. Well, what about the 20,000 people's houses that got destroyed?
Right. Or, what else is interesting to me? I've also found that incredible when people say, but the church was standing. And it always, in the news, at least once every couple of years, Christ's Church New Zealand gets whacked with an earthquake. And no one ever comments on, why is Christ's Church always getting hit with earthquakes?
Now, we talked about Brian Fuller earlier. Did you watch any of the Hannibal TV show that he did?
Yeah, I saw some a while,
It was brilliant. Did you see did you see the first movie with Anthony Hopkins?
Yeah.
Silence of the Lambs?
Yeah.
Well, in that, he talks about how it must feel good to kill because it feels good to God. Why last week he dropped a church roof on 40 of his followers while they were groveling to a hymn. And I mean, that's the God. That's the God. Somebody asked you, Sam, do you ever ponder the spiritual implications of what you've written?
Well, being an atheist, I don't feel there are any.
Gotcha. I think what they're saying is that you are better than you even think you know. You've written something that's profoundly spiritual, even as an atheist.
Well, thank you. Well, you know what's interesting is I mentioned earlier, my wife and I were Unitarian, or gone to the Unitarian Church, or I may not have mentioned that, but we did for a while. And I was talking to our minister, and I was discussing Prince of Pieces with him, and I was saying, you know, I kind of feel in some ways like a spiritual atheist, if that doesn't sound ridiculous. And he said, absolutely not. He said, that's how my parents were. So maybe that is a possibility.
That's interesting. And a lady in the chat room says that my husband is an atheist. He had an experience which has made him reconsider it, but I do support him. He's still an atheist. And she says it could be a lot worse. And you certainly could. I didn't see in the comic, unless I missed it, Sam, I didn't see the Prince of Pieces going after any atheists.
No.
Now, dude, here's an interesting question. I know we're coming up against the time I asked you for, and I want to be cognizant of that. Do people that are atheists tend to be generally better people, quote unquote, than those that are religiously indoctrinated?
Oh, I wouldn't say that. I think it's really who you are, and I think that it's just what informs and what guides you. And I mean, more people are atheists than are spiritual or religiously based than not. And I know a lot of really good people who adhere to various religions. So I don't think atheists certainly have a market on being better than anybody else.
Okay. Do atheists tend, and this is a question, do atheists tend to be more accepting of personal responsibility?
Oh, I think absolutely. I would say, because you have no external source to place any blame on or responsibility. So you basically assume all responsibility for your actions.
Well, that's an enlightened view, atheistic or not, and at least in my point of view. Now, I don't really understand this question, but it says one of the problems with organized religion is that people drop a lot of responsibility on challenging evil. Do you, Sam, do you like the show or the comic Preacher?
I do. I like the comic. I watched the first episode of the show and didn't like it, but a lot of people,
the show Preacher. Yeah. Now I know what he's talking about.
But a lot of people have told me I should give it another chance, so I probably will.
So I guess there's a comic called about the Preacher.
Right, that the TV show is based on.
Yeah, I watched one or two of them, and it was kind of good, but not enough to grab me. So I think I might give it another shot too. So, okay, now I know what he was asking you. All righty. Interesting. So as an atheist, does that also preclude a belief in witchcraft?
Yes. Well, again, okay. I would think that as an atheist, for me, it does. But again, I'm also, as I think most atheists are, I'm a skeptic. So whether it's my atheism or my skepticism, the combination, or at least one of them, precludes that belief for me.
Gotcha. And Denise says that she knows many atheists that are more loving of other people than the Christians that she knows. So that's a nice comment, and probably a nice place to leave it off. Sam, as you've written this book and as it gets distributed, what are your hopes for this book as far as what it does for people, to people? Is it just entertainment? What's your goal with the book, and do you feel like it's reaching that goal?
Well, my goal with the book is really to provoke thought, to give people something to think about. And I also hope in some ways that it gives a certain kind of comfort to some people, like people who see this hypocrisy and feel an anger towards it and see something that reflects that. And I can say it's been really nice because I've seen the reaction from people who have bought it at conventions, and they've gotten back to me. And the book really moves people. And that means a lot to me. And they really give it a lot of thought. And so it's really doing what I had hoped it would do.
Excellent. And just one more time, somebody asked the question again. I want you to give you a chance to be very clear on it. Do you believe in any, or what is your take on negative dark entities, quote unquote?
Right. Again, I don't believe in that.
Okay.
So
So it's strictly a literary device you were using in the book.
Right.
Okay, excellent. So you were using it to tell a story, but it doesn't indicate any belief in your part on this type of a supernatural being.
Right. I would not believe that this phenomenon is real. Again, as you said, I was using it as a literary device and basically using the figure of Jesus as the vehicle for the vengeance against these people.
Absolutely. So you've been eating his flesh and drinking his blood for 2,000 years, and now it's his turn. The Prince of Pieces. We've been talking with author Sam, and I forgot your last name already, Miserendino?
Yep, that's it.
Very nice to have you with us. Please tell us one more time where people can find you, because everybody's saying, I want to see him at a convention. I want to buy the book. Tell us one more time if you could, please.
Sure. I'm on Facebook, and I've got a page for Prince of Pieces on Facebook. So if you just go to Facebook, type in Prince of Pieces, you'll find it. And then I also post what conventions I'll be attending there on the Facebook page.
Absolutely. Any last thoughts you'd like to leave us with, Sam?
No, just thanks for having me on. I've really enjoyed it, and I really appreciate the questions and comments that people have made.
Absolutely. It's been my pleasure to have you. If you do write another comic, or if you write another book that gets published, please let me know. I always like to hear about what you're doing, and I'll check your Facebook page as well. And maybe one of these days I can come up and shake your hand. And one person's asking, did you get excommunicated yet?
Well, I quit before they could kick me out.
So it's kind of a moot point now.
Right.
All right, Sam, thanks so much for being with us, and say thanks to your wife for allowing you the time to share with us. I hope you had a great holiday, and I look forward to much more success for the Prince of Pieces. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being with us. Sam, if you'll stay there right for 1 second, I'd like to say goodbye to you. Prince of Pieces, get a hold of it. I'll be back later tonight with more broadcast excellence. Thank you for being here. I'm Jeffrey Daugherty, the Christian Whistleblower, and we'll see you again